Hello everyone. You survived your first short week in the class, and this is just a little video update to highlight some of what we did last week, draw your attention to some important things and that are coming up. So I will do these every week. You will receive an achievement point for watching these, because they don't just give you updates on what's coming up, but I try to review material that we have already addressed in the class through assignments and discussions and things like that. So it's actually really important that you watch these. So this is the update for week 1, in which you did your confidence assessment. And I just want to talk about a few points in relationship to this. So a confidence assessment, if you hadn't noticed before, this basically this thing I asked you to complete is really a survey, a kind of questionnaire, if you will. And what that is research, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this course. It's a way for, in this case, me to collect some kind of information or data about you as my students. This is what we would refer to as a self-report, because I'm really asking you to report on what you think about yourself in this case. And as we'll talk about more later in this class, really that's what surveys are particularly useful for finding out about what people think, what they believe, what they do according to themselves. That surveys and interviews are important methodologies for finding out about people. A few other things to draw your attention to with this survey, just kind of prime you for some of the other stuff that we're going to learn about in this course, is that these questions are probably a style that you're very familiar with. I asked you to rate yourself on a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. This type of question is called a Likert style question. That refers to the particular form of question that is used on this survey. And this form of question is important because it allows for a certain kind of statistical analysis. A couple of other things to keep in mind, that this questionnaire included both quantitative questions that allowed me to examine general trends or patterns in a population. In this particular case, the population is students in my COM 224 class, through numerical data. That means I'm able to take your responses to turn them into numbers that can tell me something about the mean, median, mode, and range, that can give me an idea of, in general, how does the class feel or about particular topics. This questionnaire also included some qualitative questions. These open-ended questions where I asked you to give me specific kinds of results, where I asked you to answer certain questions. These kinds of questions allow for things that I don't expect, potentially unexpected results. They can oftentimes allow for a researcher to gain a deeper understanding or meaning about a particular topic than a closed question response could do. And my analysis of these isn't sort of numerical or quantitative, right? I don't use the numbers to try to get a sense of the general trends, but I can use the ideas that are there to create some kind of sense of categories, themes, or major ideas that seem to be present in this information. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like, how it would be useful for thinking about research and analysis. So here we see 2 of the quantitative questions that I asked you to offer responses on, and I've went ahead and calculated the mean, median, mode, and range. You may or may not remember what these terms mean from like 8th grade math, but if you don't, it'd be a good idea to Google these just to give your sense, just to refresh your memory. But the mean generally refers to the average. What was the average response? The median can tell us what was in the middle. The mode is the most frequent. And the range tells us how much difference exists within this group. So I teach 2 sections of this class, and these are responses calculated with both of those classes. One interesting thing you see here is that while people generally were quite confident about most of the questions asked, you see, a pretty significant difference in terms of how confident you are in using the library versus how confident you are in using Google. So one important thing to think about in relationship to survey data and to asking people to answer questions about themselves is that the answers you get are what they think, which isn't necessarily what is empirically true. So one thing I have found in teaching this class over many years is that students are pretty confident in these areas. But as they learn more in the class, they start to realize that what they thought they knew, or how much they thought they knew in some of these areas, was maybe not as much as they really need to know. And so while they feel very confident, if I gave you a test asking you to do certain kinds of specific tasks related to using Google or using the BSU library, I'm not so sure that we would have as high of marks here. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. You're only ever going to get from a survey what people think, not necessarily kind of an empirical truth. But these tell us important things too. Not only do we see here a difference in the level of confidence, we also see a difference in the range. And what this means is that there's a wider variety in this question than in this one of different answers. That there are more people who are unsure of themselves in this area, even though the vast majority are more confident. So that's kind of an interesting finding, and that's the kind of thing you would pay attention to in your analysis of, say, quantitative data. This questionnaire or survey also included some open-ended questions, which give us the possibility of doing more of a qualitative analysis. So there were a wide variety of responses to these kinds of questions. And as a researcher, I'm not going to just list all the answers because that doesn't really help to my reader to digest the information that I've asked for. Instead, while with the quantitative data, I've done some kind of analysis that puts this into kind of numbers that you can use to assess what's going on. With qualitative data, I'm much more likely to pull out certain kinds of themes or ideas that are commonly articulated here. So for instance, when I ask what students are most worried about in the class, people gave a wide variety of answers, but a lot of them related to something to do with time management. Either that was just staying organized, or forgetting assignments, or keeping up with deadlines, or staying on top of the course in general. All of those I decided to call time management because they seem to relate to each other in that manner. Just a quick side note, if that is something you're worried about, I think it would be a good idea to keep track of, to block out certain amounts of time for this course in your weekly schedule. Another major theme here was workload. Some people, I suppose, have taken a look over the weekly schedule and seen that there's quite a bit of work some weeks and have maybe been a little bit scared about what that's going to look like. Some people mentioned specifically aspects of the research paper, whether that was writing it or failing to write it. That idea of a research paper was a little bit scary or worrisome. Others mentioned specific things about sources, being able to find good sources, up-to-date sources, credible sources, having to deal specifically with scholarly sources. And then lastly was a theme of just general failure. So you see with each of these questions, instead of just writing out 40 answers, I took those answers and tried to see, well, what were the main kinds of ideas that percolated from that? That's what we would call a kind of qualitative data analysis. We'll talk more about both quantitative and qualitative research later in the semester. Lastly, I just want to draw your attention to my values. I think some of it's getting lost here. I'm not sure if you can see it on your end. some main values were will help you be successful were things like time management, dedication or hard work, organization, and drive, just drive to be successful. Interesting here was how often people mention things that I didn't really consider values, things that I would have considered maybe skills. So things like writing well, or being able to use sources accurately, or being creative. So that's one of the places where something like qualitative data can give you interesting and unexpected results. You know, some of these things I wouldn't have thought of as values. And so that's kind of interesting that many students listed these kinds of things. So as a researcher, we might ask why. Is it because we have a different definition? Is it because the question was unclear? Is it because students have a wider variety of what counts as a value? I mean, these would be kind of interesting questions that might lead to further research as well. So that kind of gives you an overall sense of the some of the things I wanted you to pay attention to with the confidence assessment. Overall, it seems like most students feel pretty comfortable with the kinds of skills we'll be developing in this class. Hopefully you will use what you know and add to it what you learn to become even a better research and writer in this course. Keep in mind that next week, a couple of quick things about next week. One of the things that I'm going to do immediately after I finish recording this is I'm going to list discussion leaders right here for this week's discussion. I usually wait and don't do it immediately at the beginning of the semester because I'm waiting to see after drop add who will still be in the class and who won't. But I'll be putting those up, and they'll be up for the rest of the semester. So please pay attention to discussion leaders. Pay attention for what weeks you're listed as discussion leader, and keep in mind that's the only time that you'll have an assignment that's due other than Sunday. If you're a discussion leader, I want you to post by Wednesday. Respondents need to post the first time by Friday, the second time by Sunday. Everything else is always due on Sunday. So another thing to keep in mind is that I have already updated your grades on the assignments from last week. You'll note that in the discussion grade, it says that you've received, if you've completed that discussion, it says you've received 5 out of 50 points. That's because I only have one column for the discussion board for the whole semester. So the whole semester, you have the opportunity to earn a total of 50 points. Right now, you've only had an opportunity to earn 5 points. So if showing 5 right now, it means you have complete points. But it's just very much easier for me to have one column for that. So even though it looks like an F, it's not. If you have 5 points there, you have an A 100% right now. As per usual, if you have questions that come up throughout the week, please feel free to send me an email.